Welcome to UO Today. I'm Steve Shankman, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. The University of Oregon Library started a research award program for undergraduates this year. The awards are designed to recognize students whose original scholarship makes extensive use of the resources of the University of Oregon libraries. Today we're going to talk with two of this year's award recipients and the professors who nominated them. Our first guest is Alletta Brenner, who was awarded $1,000 for her work for a Clark Honors College class. Alletta Brenner was the valedictorian of the Forest Grove High School in 2002. She is pursuing a double major in Women's and Gender Studies and History at the Clark Honors College. She has studied abroad in France. She plays both jazz and classical piano, and her GPA is a whopping 3.92. Alletta Brenner is accompanied today by Assistant Professor of History Dan Rosenberg, who nominated her for the Literary Research Award for a paper written in his Historical Epistemology class. Dan Rosenberg did his undergraduate work at Wesleyan University. I'm not sure about his GPA. He earned his MA and PhD at the University of California, Berkeley, and he came to Oregon in 2000. His research focuses on the French Enlightenment. His recent work examines the problem of the information explosion since the 18th century. It's great to have the two of you on the show today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, Alletta, your award-winning paper is entitled The Good and Bad of That Sex, Monstrosity and Womanhood in Early Modern England.
Yes.
Very intriguing. Tell us, I'm sure Professor Rosenberg says you have to get your thesis maybe in one sentence. Tell us what your thesis is in one or two sentences, and then expound on it, if you will.
My thesis is basically, there's a very complicated argument under it, but that during the period of early modern England, identity formation, the notion of femininity was undergoing some really important changes. And those changes had a lot to do with the formation of modernity and the way that people looked at the world. And one of the ways that that sort of change and fluctuation was made evident was by the way that women were associated with monstrosity. In particular, sort of notions that women were unnatural, or that sort of imagining women as monstrous-type creatures, as dangerous creatures that were threatening to society and needed to be controlled.
And so by early modern, what precisely do you mean by that?
Early modern England would be from the 16th century to the 17th century, sort of looking from 1550 to 1650, which was a very turbulent time in English history and a lot of really crazy things going on, from the Civil War to a lot of just dramatic political and social changes.
The English,
yes.
The English Civil War.
Yes.
So tell me about the challenges that you encountered in your research, and just how you became such an extraordinary researcher.
This paper was interesting because it was combining a lot of theoretical works and a lot of different ideas about history in this period with a lot of really specific, close reading of different sources. And so the research itself wasn't that difficult, it just required a lot of time at the library digging through books and bibliographies and looking for interesting sources. But the most difficult thing was finding a way to synthesize all that enormous amount of information and trying to make it into a coherent argument. So, does that answer your question?
Well, yeah. So how much stuff did you have that you had? How long was the paper, and how much did you have to kind of get to get rid of?
Okay, well, the paper was about 20 pages. And I probably
This is from the sophomore, by the way.
And I had a stack of
I
had a stack of books from the library that was at least probably 25 to 30 books that I looked at in doing this project, along with just sort of incorporating things I've read and learned in other courses. And then I also looked at a lot of microfilm. There's a collection that the university has called the Thomason Tract Collection, which is a fascinating collection of early modern texts that were collected by a printer in London. And so I spent quite a bit of time going through those, looking at all different kinds of pamphlets and interesting books at the time.
Was that fun?
It was very fun.
And had you used that resource before you
Yeah,
took the...
I hadn't used. I've spent a lot of time looking at microfilms before and doing this kinds of original primary source research. I hadn't worked with the Thomason Tract collection. I just sort of stumbled upon it, and I just thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, this is one of the things which was actually very notable about Alletta's work in this class. The students we have entering the university today don't necessarily know what microfilm is and don't have an interest in working their way through it, since we have excellent online databases. And in fact, the Thomason Tracts that Alletta used in this paper since then have been entered into an online database which the University of Oregon has acquired because of a terrific private donation specifically directed toward that. At the time, the only way to find the pamphlet that Alletta found was just to look through reels and reels of this, and it's something that she found on her own without any direction from faculty.
Well, congratulations. That shows a tremendous amount of initiative. Dan, you want to tell us something about the class that for which Alletta did the research and where the paper fit into the class itself?
Well, the class is called Historical Epistemology, and of course, epistemology is the study of knowledge. In this class, we were interested in the way in which processes of knowledge collection and knowledge formation change over time. And what was interesting about Alletta's paper is the really kind of material, gritty quality of it, looking specifically at the way in which print culture produced new kinds of seeing and new kinds of thinking in the early modern period.
So how many people were, tell me the level of the class and how many people were in it?
This was a small seminar, upper division, so there were about 12, mostly juniors and seniors. I think Alletta was the only sophomore in the class.
Wow. 300 level class. So I mean, this
400
is
level class.
400 level class, and you were a sophomore at the time. This is something I think our audience would be interested in, that it is possible at the University of Oregon, supposedly one of the big state universities, to get that kind of attention in the class.
It's possible all over the university for students who are motivated to go and find it. The Honors College is a program that particularly fosters that kind of interaction.
Do you want to tell us, Dan, if you can, a little bit about the other students and their projects, some of the other projects in the class?
This was an exciting class, and I have to say, Alletta's paper was absolutely phenomenal, but there were other great papers in the class too. Among them, a very interesting work on Robert Hooke's Micrographia. This is Hooke is one of the first scientists to use a microscope in his research. And the question posed in this paper is, how do you see through a microscope, and what do you see? Hooke faced a lot of problems, and one of them was that it turns out the things you look at under microscopes move. And as a scientist, Hooke wanted to give very specific, solid descriptions of the things he saw. At the same time, as a scientist, he wanted to be honest about what he saw, and what he saw didn't always stay still for him. And so I had a terrific paper on that, again, about this process of kind of building new ways of seeing and thinking about scientific objects. It was a wonderful paper by Nick Viles, who's still at the university, about envisioning Mexico in the 19th century through the new railway system. There's a great paper on 19th century popular science, papers on all kinds of different subjects. Again, the unifying problem is not just how you know, but how you use things in the world to make knowledge.
Well, you use the microform materials, and you say you used them before, and I'm wondering how you became a researcher as a sophomore.
Well, freshman year, all of the students at the Clark Honors College go through a history and literature sequence that culminates in an end-of-the-year research project. And actually, I was in the freshman history class in Professor Rosenberg's class as a freshman, and I did a project on the IWW and history of labor in the United States. And it also had to do with women and identity and some of those similar themes. And so as part of that project, I did a bunch of research looking through labor newspapers from the period of the turn of the century to 1920, and reading some of the stories and depictions of women in those. So
So, but to what do you attribute your research? You know, your aptitude for research, your interest in research, even before you came to the Honors College. Could you see it? Could you see it coming?
Yeah, definitely. When I was in high school, I participated in speech and debate, and I did several different kinds of debate, cross-ex debate, which is cross-examination debate, and I also did extemporaneous speaking, both of which require a lot of research. You have these very large tubs full of all different kinds of evidence. And so I spent an enormous amount of time doing research for that. And also, I don't know, I think I like the hunt and sort of finding something that no one else has looked at in a long time and drawing new connections between evidence and things like that. And so,
a natural historian.
I suppose.
So tell me, if you have any plans yet for what you're going to do with your double major when you graduate. I believe it's in 2006. Is that right? So it's next spring.
Right now I'm working on a thesis for the Honors College, and so I'm planning on working on that, and hopefully eventually I can work towards sending that out and maybe getting it published.
Wow.
So that's an aspiration of mine. I'm hoping that I'll get accepted into the Teach for America program, and I'd love to do that for a few years. And then ultimately, I would like to go to law school at NYU and study international law, and if things work out possibly, then maybe I can end up working for an international NGO dealing with human rights and environmental issues.
You have your act together. That's impressive.
It is impressive, and the seeds are already there in the thesis for all of this stuff that Alletta wants to go on and do.
Tell us about Teach in America just a bit. I mean, it seems like quite a few people in the Honors College seem interested in that program.
Yeah, Teach for America is a program where they recruit really high-achieving students right out of college to work for 2 years at a sort of underachieving, underfunded school as a teacher. And through the program, you can get your master's in education and get certified as a teacher. But many of the people who do the program don't go on to be teachers. It's just sort of a real-world experience, especially for people who are social justice-minded, to sort of test things out in the real world and see how does theory, come into action.
Dan, can you give us a sense of the effect on your own research of working with these high-powered and ambitious undergraduates? What does it do for you both as a teacher and a scholar?
Well, in some cases there's a very specific payoff, as in this one where I didn't know about the Thomason Tract before Alletta's paper, and then I did afterwards. But in general, it's just it's an exciting, inspiring environment, and as a teacher, your energy gets redoubled when you feel it coming back from the students.
I really enjoy working with the professors at the Honors College in particular. It seems that a lot of the colloquial classes sort of have to do with their own research and their own projects. I recently took a class from Professor Fracchia that was basically, the whole class was sort of worked around this book project he's working on. And so we were able to sort of participate in that dialogue and help him with his research and writing of the book, as well as work on our own research projects. And so it's a very exciting thing to be able to collaborate. I really feel like at the Honors College, students are respected as academics and really get to participate in a discourse with the professors.
Yeah. So a research university does not includes the undergraduates, I think, and sometimes that's not what people think out there. But research and teaching can really go together. Well, it's been a delight speaking with both of you. We've been speaking with Library Research Award winner Alletta Brenner and her professor, Dan Rosenberg. And we'll be back with another winner in a moment. Welcome back. Our next guest is Dunya Chirchi, who was awarded a $1,000 award for her work in a political science class. Dunya Chirchi expects to graduate this year with a BA in political science and a 4.02 GPA. We'll find out what Ron's GPA is in a minute. Her minor is in Latin American Studies. She is currently a research assistant in the political science department. Last summer, she was a State Department intern at the U.S. Consulate in Ecuador. The year before, she was a foreign exchange student in Ecuador, and after that, an English tutor. Dunya Chirchi is active in the College Democrats, works as a bilingual volunteer with the Sexual Assault Support Services Program in Eugene. She's an actor or an actress, a singer, a dancer, and she studies classical piano and clarinet. She's accompanied by Associate Professor of Political Science Ron Mitchell. He nominated her for the Library Research Award for the paper she wrote for his political science class, International Environmental Politics. Ron Mitchell did his undergraduate work at Stanford. He earned his master's in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and his PhD from Harvard. His research focuses on environmental science and policy. Thank you both for coming on the show. Dunya, your award-winning paper is entitled The Combined Success of the International Tropical Timber Agreements. Can you tell us something about your paper?
Yeah, the assignment was to evaluate the effectiveness of an environmental treaty, and so I chose to look at deforestation in third world nations, and one of the main treaties focusing on deforestation is the International Tropical Timber Agreement, and there were actually two of them. And so I looked at both of them, comparing if they had been effective and if one was more effective than the other. And I looked at a group of countries from Latin America, Africa, and Asia, all third world nations, exporting nations, and I evaluated the treaties and found that they were successful.
So tell us what you found particularly about, tell us about your conclusions of your research.
Well, actually, I concluded in the end that the treaties were indeed successful, the latter one being more successful than the first, because they improved on it a lot. They added a fund to help out these developing nations to try and conserve their forests. And I actually, evaluating the effectiveness of an environmental treaty can be very ambiguous. It's very hard to say if it was the treaty or if it was a variety of other factors. And so for up until the very end of my research, I was going back and forth on whether I would argue if the treaty had been effective or if it had not. And in the end, I decided that it was a stronger argument to argue that they were indeed effective.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I concluded.
Tell me what inspired you to take on this particular project.
Well, I lived in Latin America for a year, and I have countries in Latin America hold a really special place in my heart. And I originally wanted to only focus on Latin American nations, and I thought deforestation was a good issue that encompassed a lot of those countries. But as I researched and as I found data and didn't find data and found sources and didn't find sources, I realized that I would kind of need to spread it out. And Ron kind of helped me realize that in order to look at a group of countries, you need to compare them to another group of countries, and that's when the African and the Asian nations came in.
Tell me about your special relationship to Latin America. When did that begin and how?
I studied abroad my sophomore year in Quito, Ecuador, and lived there for a year and studied Spanish. And towards the end, I became an English tutor as well. And I just had a very, very wonderful experience, and I'm very interested in speaking Spanish in my career someday. And I went back. I applied for an internship with the State Department because I'm interested in going into the Foreign Service, and I was placed at the consulate in Ecuador again, which was really lucky. And so I went back to Ecuador, and I've also traveled in other countries in Latin America and plan on going back soon.
So tell me some of the challenges you encountered in conducting the research for this project. What were some of your low points and high points?
There were definitely a lot of low points in the beginning because I had never researched anything before. And so I spent hours at the library. I like to check things off my list kind of person, and I would go and sit in the library when I was first beginning this research and search online for hours and talk to librarians for hours and not really get anything done. And I switched. I started out with a different treaty, actually, and eventually settled with the Tropical Timber Agreement. And then there was the whole kind of figuring out what countries I wanted to use, which took even more time. And then there was, of course, just the process of researching. And it's very hard, like, Ron does this for a living. It's very easy for him to evaluate the effectiveness of an environmental treaty, but for an amateur, it's very overwhelming. It's hard to know what to look at and all the other impacting variables that come into play.
So when did you see some daylight, and when did you start thinking, hey, I think I'm gonna be able to get through this?
Well, it was actually when I realized, because originally I was going to look at deforestation rates, and Ron made me realize that that's a very hard thing to get data on. It's very unreliable data. And so he advised me to look at exports, because exports you get, a numerical amount that you can work with and see if up or down. And so I talked to the librarians, and they directed me towards the FAO statistics, and they've kept track of tropical timber exports in a number of countries across the world for years back. And after I found the books, the volumes, I found the FAO website, which had all of the data online, which made it a lot easier to manipulate in Excel and kind of decide.
FAO stands for?
Oh,
Well,
The United Nations Food
and Agricultural
okay,
Organization.
yeah.
Excuse me.
So that's when things started to go.
Yeah.
This export, the idea of
Yeah.
looking at the exports
And finding the data.
Yeah. So it was a kind of, and that's where the professor comes in and can really help you as a young researcher to move forward.
Yes.
And so Ron, I wanted to just to talk with you a bit now about where this particular paper and this project fit into your class, and how much input you had to in the selection of the paper topics of your students.
Well, actually, the class is one in which for several years now I've used the same assignment, which is to just open it up to students and say, pick a treaty, any treaty, and determine how effective it was. And one of the real challenges in the course is the one that Dunya faced, which is this notion of there are a lot of treaties for which there is no data available, for which you could say, how well did it do? That's the question, is how well did it do? And there's lots of treaties that have no empirical evidence of that. And students struggle with that a lot. Many of them do, as Dunya did, start out going down one road and have to switch horses in midstream. And I think what made Dunya's paper stand out from the crowd, as it were, is that Dunya had the foresight to begin early, to recognize that she was going to have trouble so that she could switch horses in midstream, and then to just put in the hours. And also, I think I give a lot of guidance to students on this in this course. And Dunya's one of them who actually kind of took the guidance seriously and said, oh, you really mean go in and talk to the librarians, go in and do the research early on in the term, come in and see me and talk to things. So it's that Dunya took a lot of the initiative to really do the research, to think hard about what countries to involve in the study, to include in the study, to think hard about what's data would be good, what does the data mean, and just put in the time to collect the right resources, whether it's a librarian, it's the books, it's the websites, it's kind of pulling all that together, reading the literature, thinking about theories of why treaties are effective, and putting all that together, which really made it a really wonderful paper to read.
So what level class is it?
It's a 400 level class, which is for seniors.
And how many students were in the class?
About 30 to 40.
And do you often see this caliber of research from undergraduate papers?
No, I don't. In fact, it's a class in which I do not make a habit of giving A+, in which I did in Dunya's case. Because no, you see a lot of good research here with students at U of O. And yet Dunya's stood out as of really graduate level work at an undergraduate level.
Dunya, you're graduating this year, is that
Yes.
right? And what's next for you?
Well, actually, I'm not sure. I'm in the application process for an internship in Washington, D.C., and I'm supposed to be hearing back in a couple weeks on that. And if that doesn't work out, I plan on learning another language by traveling either to Brazil or France, because I either want to learn French or Portuguese next, as they're related to Spanish, and it's easy to take that on.
And
Excuse me.
Sure,
After
sure.
if the internship doesn't work out, and after a year of traveling, taking some time off, I am going to graduate school for international relations, international studies.
And when did that idea first appeal to you, going in this direction?
My internship with the State Department really solidified that this summer. Experiencing the life of a Foreign Service officer for 3 months was a really great experience. And
this was in Ecuador?
This is in Ecuador. This is this past summer. But I've always considered it. I've also considered studying many other things in my graduate studies, but just recently I've really solidified my decision. I was considering law school for some time as well, but I've really decided that international diplomacy is definitely my calling. Is what I want to do.
So when did you feel that you had the passion? When did you find your passion in your undergraduate career? When did you say, okay, now this is something I really should do?
Well, when I was an English teacher in Ecuador, I was teaching English at the U.S. Embassy in Quito, and I was only an English teacher, mind you, but I was really inside. I got to translate some documents. That was part of my job description, and that was kind of my first taste of it. And then when I came back and I got the job working with Ron and reading treaties and seeing their format and seeing how countries come together to solve these problems in a cooperative manner, it really made me realize, it solidified my decision even further that that was what I wanted to do. And working with Ron over these past 2 years has solidified it further. And then, of course, my internship was the final.
So do you have any advice to potential undergraduates out there about, things that they should really think hard about when they're in college?
Well, I think that going abroad is an experience that cannot be had on the U of O campus, and I think it can really open one's eyes to how things work in the rest of the world. And also it gives you the opportunity to be uncomfortable and be humbled a lot and be in an environment that is very different from your own. And I think in realizing that, you realize the wonderful things about your culture and also new things about yourself. And the direction for my life was definitely found when I was abroad, and the things that occurred after. And it was all inspired by that experience.
Well, that's great advice to our potential students out there. Thanks so much for being with us, both of you.
Thank you.
Okay. We've been speaking with Library Research Award winner Dunya Chirchi and her professor, Ron Mitchell. Honorable mention awards for $500 each for this competition went to researchers Lacey Ehrenkrantz and Leslie Fry. Thank you for watching.